What's going on, everyone? Preston Stewart with War Stories, and you're getting ready to watch the highlights from one of our recent episodes. Now, if you want to listen to the full, unedited conversation, that's available on the War Stories podcast, which is published just about everywhere podcasts are available, with the links to Spotify and Apple in the video description here. Hope you enjoy.
We did a lot of active bombardment when I was on our first WEST PAC in 1972. We deployed from Pearl Harbor. I think it was in January or February, and we went to the Southeast Asia. And so we spent the cruise is about 6 months long, and we spent about 5 months out of those 6 months at sea. We
Doug,
really
what kind of ship were you on? Can you add that?
I was on a destroyer escort. It's not a large ship. It has a crew of about 200 people. I looked it up just to make myself clear that the size of it, it was 390 feet long and 44 feet wide. And it had a draft of 24 feet. As a ship goes, it was a big ship, but it's not anything compared to a cruiser or to a carrier or anything like that. And we had two major guns on it, 5-inch 38 gun turrets and single cannon mounts. And one was forward and one was at midships. And we also were designed to be an anti-submarine warfare ship. And that means that we had a rocket launcher on there. I think it held somewhere around 16 missiles. And they would fire those up and down into the sea if they had a sighting of a submarine. And they are supposed to go down and seek it out and hopefully destroy it. But we never did any anti-submarine warfare when we were in Southeast Asia. We were primarily on the gun line and firing round after round after round into South Vietnam. And so we did that first cruise. They put together what they called as a cruise book, and it has pictures of all the crew, pictures of some of the things that we were doing. And on the back, the last page of it has 14,600 rounds. That's how many rounds we fired when we were off the coast of Vietnam. And for two 5-inch 38 guns, that's a lot of rounds, one at a time.
How long of a period would that have been? A couple months?
That would have been over the 6-month period. So
6 months.
Yeah.
Wow.
We had
14,000.
14,000.
We were talking about how Preston and I are hard of hearing. How is your hearing then? Because that's more than us. Way more.
Well,
way more.
I do have a disability from the VA, and part of it's from Agent Orange. And then one of my diagnoses was from some hearing dysfunction. And it would have been from the guns because we didn't wear any ear protection. They didn't wear any ear protection in the gun mount. And I was in the upper handling room, just below the gun. And yeah, it could be very loud and very constant. You talk about your experience with a round going off and how you couldn't hear for a little while. I had one of those experiences myself. I was in the upper handling room, and the hatch to the main deck blew open. It wasn't secured correctly. And so there we were with the gun firing basically over that door and just making all kinds of noise. So I took it upon myself to reach out and grab the hatch to close it before they fired any more rounds, but apparently they had one more to go. And so that cannon fired right over my head and basically knocked me back across the passageway.
That could kill you. That could kill you if you're close enough to it.
And so when you say close enough, are you meaning kind of close to the muzzle to where it actually comes out, the blast.
Yeah. Actually, I would have been about maybe 5 feet away from the muzzle and maybe 8 feet below it. So I was close.
That's what jacks you up. That is what jacked me up when I was talking earlier about that whatever tank thing. I think it was because of the relationship to where it was coming out. I wasn't behind it far enough. It was like I was on line with it, and that's a whole different sort of concussion when you're sort of on line to those things. From my experience, at least.
Like I said, it knocked me across the passage. I did get up and shut the hatch, so that part was all secure, but that was loud. And well, that's what happens. You try to do the right thing and you get in the wrong place at the right time.
Were you guys firing pre-planned targets, or were you waiting for radio calls from troops on the ground to try to support them?
Well, what do you mean by pre-planned?
Pre-planned as in you had them ahead of time and you were just going up to get in range, you'd fire the rounds and then get out of there, versus waiting for somebody to call you and say, we need help, and you're the closest asset?
I think it's a mix of both. There were a lot of spotter planes that were up and they would report and call in as far as what the mission would be. But there was also the being on the gun line. What they would do is there would be like maybe 8 to 10 ships, and they would form a circle, and the ships would go around, and you come up along the shore and you fire your rounds, and then you come back out, and the ship behind you comes in and they fire their rounds and keep going around and around. That would be more pre-planned because they're engaged in some sort of bringing in military or soldiers from that are out to sea. One time there was an experience where there was a lot of helicopters. There was a helicopter ship further out to sea, and we were going around and we were firing our rounds. I was up on the forward lookout at that time, and so and again, you're not wearing any ear protection, you're just wearing a battle helmet. And we were firing our guns, all the other ships were firing their guns. There was smoke, there was cork, there was everything going all over the place. And then there would be a lull, and then there would be this wave after wave of helicopters. And I think in '72, they were bringing in the South Vietnamese army. And so they were having some sort of an invasion on shore at that time. And so that's kind of what we were involved with quite often. And then there's other times when we would be on station and we would get a call to a mission, and a lot of times in the middle of the night, where we'd be firing round after round after round. In my compartment, where we slept and lived, basically, you could hear the hoist from the lower magazine. And if it seems like on the mid-watch, 12 to 4, there was always more activity going on then, plus the daytime bombardments. But at night, they did a lot of it. But you'd be laying in your rack, and if you had the mid-watch, you would start hearing that hoist start to crank, and you start saying, oh boy, it's going to be a busy night. So they were bringing up the shells and getting them all ready to do their next firing mission. And that, again, you're not so fearful of what's going on with the firing missions and also with the projectiles that you're handling. But when we're in the upper handling room and trying to get all the projectiles ready to send up to the gun mount, we would always try to get a little bit further ahead, because there were times when they wanted more and more and more, and we were just waiting for that hoist to get up, bring up more powder, more projectiles. And they had these brackets around the upper handling room that you're supposed to strap the shells in. We didn't even have time to strap them in. We were just stacking them, setting them up on the deck, and then they decided to make a turn. And so the ship would turn, and all those projectiles, they just start rolling all over the place. And I guess there's They wouldn't detonate perhaps, but we're grabbing these things and trying to get them back in order, and then they call for 10 more rounds, and so we get 10 more of them up there, and just constantly all night long, and your sweat was just rolling off you like crazy. And these ships, we going back to Zach Morris talking about the LCIs in World War II, they didn't have air conditioning. We did have air conditioning. Our ships were air conditioned.
Nice.
They were comfortable. But when you're working like that, it's
still working. How heavy was a round? And real quick, so were you an ammo bearer or loader?
Yeah.
Like, what was your job?
I was basically an ammo bearer below the gun mount.
Okay.
I did a little time up in the gun mount, you throw the shell in, the powder canister, and then the shell in, and then they'd fire from there. But most of my time was in the upper handling room, just below the gun mount.
Got it. And how heavy were these rounds that you were always having to handle?
Oh, well, have you handled a 5-inch 38 or?
No, that's what I'm saying. No, clueless.
What's that compared to on the artillery side? Like 105 millimeter?
Even those rounds, like I was an infantry guy, so I just wasn't around big guns.
They probably weigh 20 pounds,
Okay.
maybe 25.
Sure.
They weren't terribly heavy, and we just get them up there and throw them in the hoist that goes up to the mount. And the canisters with the powder, those were light, but they were maybe 20 pounds.
Sure.
What was the enemy threat that you had to be concerned about? Or were you? Was there anything that would keep you guys up at night when you were in these bombardment roles?
We really didn't face any kind of threat from the Vietnamese. There was a concern about fishing boats, and they didn't want any boats getting too close to you because you never knew what they were up to. I didn't see it, but I heard a report of one fishing boat that got very close to our ship, and they opened up on it with a 50 caliber machine gun, and that pretty well took care of that fishing boat. But as far as any threats, airstrikes or anything like that, there were MiGs in some of the areas, but we really didn't face any kind of shore bombardment coming towards us. Every once in a while, there would be something that would happen, and we'd have to get out of there, and the captain would start running a zigzag course to get out. And so we did get fired upon a little bit, but nothing that we really had to be worried about.
It was
Who would have been
possible.
shooting at you? Sorry. Who would have been shooting at you?
It would have been North Vietnamese.
Well, like how, I guess, because I'm picturing this big metal thing out in the ocean. How are they, like, what are they shooting at you with? How are they getting even close enough to where this is a thing?
They'd be some kind of, well, we'd be probably within 2 or 3 miles of shore. And so they would be firing some sort of a cannon from infantry or artillery from shore. So what they were, I could never see them. I never saw any activity that was on shore, because most of our rounds were going to go in about 15 miles. Right. And, so we were back there 15 miles away from where they were landing. B-52 strikes, those were interesting because they would drop their load of bombs, and we would be sitting about 3 miles offshore, and the B-52s would be dropping their bombs somewhere around probably 10, 15 miles inland. We didn't see the B-52s, we didn't see the bombardment, but we felt the concussion.
Really?
It was so strong that it shook our ship. You're standing there and you just feel it rattling because of the amount of bombs that they were dropping on Vietnam.
Holy cow.
Wow.
Yeah,
I think what it felt like they were in bunkers right below it, and you felt it 15 miles out in an ocean.
Yeah. I wondered how could anything survive? But they've been at war for so long, they had all their trenches and their tunnels and everything, so they were all below ground. So I don't know how much damage we were really doing with all of that bombardment.
This was a phase where we were starting to withdraw troops from the ground, from within Vietnam. Is that correct?
Yeah.
71, 72?
Yeah. Most of the Army and the Marines were pulling out, but the South Vietnamese were still very active. And I was reading one of the Time Life books about what was happening during 1972. It's probably what it was reported in that book was that it was probably some of the most vicious fighting that was going on, but it was the South Vietnamese fighting the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese in their homeland. So we didn't deal a lot with the U.S. Army or the Marines. There was one time I was on the motorboat crew, and we went ashore. We had to pick up a Marine and bring him back to our ship for some reason or whatever, but we didn't face any fire from that or whatever. Although I think the Lieutenant JG that was aboard our motor wellboat was more nervous about everything than any of the rest of us. He was standing there with his gun and he was ready to shoot.
To take them on.
He was taking them on, but nothing.
You mentioned Agent Orange earlier. I don't normally think about that with the Navy. I think of it with the soldiers on the ground, soldiers and Marines, or maybe even the Air Force that's dropping it overhead. But how does that tie in with the Navy?
Well, I sat on a jury trial one time, and it was about one farmer who was spraying his field with herbicide, but his neighbor's farm got sprayed by the herbicide. And so it ruined part of his crop. It's what they called drift. And what they finally determined is that, yes, the Agent Orange was dropped on the jungles of South Vietnam, but they didn't take into consideration also that there was drift that took place, and apparently drift had come out across into the sea. So if you were within a certain range of the shore, they determined that you were probably affected by Agent Orange if you developed certain conditions. And one thing I developed was diabetes. And my doctor at the VA said, you ought to file a claim about that, because they're looking at the Navy as being recipients for disability for Agent Orange. So I didn't think much about it, but I filed the claim, and lo and behold, I got a disability out of the whole thing.
That had to have been just a shocking amount of Agent Orange, which is a pesticide, a defoliant. I'm sorry, it's a defoliant that killed much of the vegetation. For anybody listening, but think about how much had to have been used for the military to recognize that it's drifting out miles across the ocean. That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the motto of the military. If a little is good enough, well, more can be a lot better. So they probably used a lot more than maybe what they needed to do. I don't know. But the thing is that we were exposed, and so we'll see what happens. And the one thing that I'm concerned about with you guys are those burn pits that you were involved with in Afghanistan. So that could be the next Agent Orange.
I think that'll be our version. Yeah,
it is.
Hopefully
different
not
degrees.
as bad. Yeah,
exactly. Like, I don't think it was as bad in general as what Vietnam was, right? Just from all things considered, and Vietnam wasn't as bad as whatever your dad had to do in the Pacific Theater, which was nuts. And that's all progress, but they all have their issues. That's for sure. There's lots of unknown hazards. It's like you're going there. It's like, well, I'm kind of expecting to get blown up or shot at a minimum. Whether it hits me, it's a little different. But to think like all this other long nagging cancers and things like that accumulate as a result. You're just not thinking that way. Back when you were saying when you're 19, 20, whatever you are, kind of invincible, not really thinking about the future in ways that you might think of it later as you get older and more mature. I mean, brains aren't even fully developed till you're 25. So, I mean, we're a little crazy going into those things.
Yeah.
Did you?
So that, at least they're identifying it and doing something to compensate us for. So I guess that's a positive.
What did it look like when you either moved into the reserve or even after you got out of the service in terms of connection with your shipmates from those WEST PACs? Did you guys stay in touch? Are there a couple folks you stayed in touch with? Anything like that?
Somebody developed a Facebook page for the USS Sample, and so I can connect with them. They do some reunions. I haven't gone to any, and so I really haven't stayed in contact with many of my shipmates or whatever. Another thing that I wanted to touch base with you on is one of the things that we did in 1972 was our ship was involved with the mining of Haiphong Harbor. So one of my claim to fame, I guess, is that I was probably further north in North Vietnam than most people, but at least I wasn't held prisoner or whatever. But at that time, President Nixon was trying to up the ante with the North Vietnamese, and he was working towards freeing the POWs. And so one of the stressors to put on them was to mine the Haiphong Harbor. And so our ship was involved with that. So we didn't fire at that time, but there was a lot of bombardment that did go on, and they did the mining. And so when we were ready to leave, I crawled out one of the hatches on the main deck and peeked my head up there because I wanted to see North Vietnam. And so I did see it, and we were starting to steam out of there and be on our way.
What did it look like? Look like South Vietnam?
It looked like, yeah, it looked like anything that you would see on land from a couple miles at sea. But we
still an
were,
experience. You knew what you were seeing, and as you soaked it in, which is kind of, you could appreciate what you were doing at that time, which is cool.
Yeah. And there were MiGs and things. We were at general quarters, and so there was the threat there. But I mean, there were several cruisers there, and just a lot of ships that were involved in all that, and aircraft carriers that were sending planes over. So yeah, that was a pretty kind of an exciting experience to take place there.
Maybe this would have been that time, but did you ever have an experience in the Navy where you're able to look out over the ship and see a bunch of other U.S. Navy ships? To me, that's always like the coolest scene in movies when they recreate it, when somebody looks out and sees just the vast expanse of the U.S. Navy. Is that realistic? Did you get to see that?
Not to that degree. You look at D-Day, that would have been impressive to see all those ships out there. But when we headed over on our first task force, there was about 10 or 12 of us that all went together. Mm-hmm. So we're in that formation, and we did maneuvers and everything while we were heading across the Pacific and everything. So that was impressive to see all the other ships and everything. And working with an aircraft carrier, that was always impressive. We several times refueled from an aircraft carrier. So they come up alongside and they run a hose across, and they plug it into your valve there on the main deck, and they pump you full of the fuel so you can keep on going.
I think that speaks to how big aircraft carriers are.
Yeah,
impressive. Even the refueling, like you're talking about. I don't even know how you go about refueling the aircraft carrier then from that point.
Yeah,
it's exactly. Just you're in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, and they're out to sea for a long time. Well, there's oilers out there too. Tanker ships that are always filled with the fuel for your boilers, and so they would go back and forth from ports to refuel themselves, and then they would come out and they would refuel other ships, and they probably were refueling the carriers as well with the various jet fuels as well as the operational fuel.